morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Correll. I am a PhD candidate at Louisiana State University's Department of Environmental Sciences. As we approach the 50th Earth Day, Louisiana State University's College of the Coast and the Environment thought it would be fun and educational to speak with a few organizers of the very first Earth Day event at the University of Georgia. Here, all three of our experts were PhD students working on their own work while also trying to make a difference in the world. I am pleased to announce that despite being currently in lockdown, we are still able to have three wonderful experts together to discuss this Earth Day, what impacts Earth Day has had in the environment, in the environmental movement in the last 50 years, and how we see it proceeding in the next 50 years. They were all organizers of the very first Earth Day on April 22nd, 1970, and this historic day has had a lasting impact that has people all over the world working together to protect the Earth's environment. As a PhD student myself, it is inspiring to learn about the great accomplishments and impacts extracurricular work has had for these three experts. Participating in events held by Louisiana State University on Earth Day is a great joy. 50 years ago, a big plastic bubble was made for people to walk through and learn about the impacts of human decisions and waste on the environment. Last year, I volunteered to work with LSU's Earth Day to teach children about science and the importance of water. Earth Days over the past several decades have focused on protecting clean air, water, and resources. It's a time that people of all backgrounds were able to come together with a common goal to collaborate for the environment that had little concern given for its protection. All across the country, there were lectures on impacts that humans have on the environment, sermons about pollution, and students volunteering to clean up. There were teach-ins across schools and universities, and students missed the classes to be a part of this. The day and movement were such successes that by the end of 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was established to ensure protection of the environment, particularly air and water. 20 years later, Earth Day went global. The success of Earth Day is seen in celebration of it every year on April 22nd, with people all over the world coming together. Today, our panelists will reflect back on that day in 1970 where it all began, issues at the forefront of the time, and how people became motivated to become a part of this historic event. I would now like to take a moment to introduce our three speakers. Christopher Delia serves as Professor and Dean of LSU's College of the Coast and Environment, a position he has held since 2009. Dr. Eugene Turner is a Boyd Professor at Louisiana State University. He is co-chair of the International Association for Ecology, Wetland Working Group, executive board member of INICOL, and serves on national scientific communities. Dr. Hank Shugart is a W.W. Corcoran Professor of Natural History in the Department of Environmental Sciences and co-faculty in the Biology Department at the University of Virginia. I want to say welcome to our panelists, and let's get started. To begin, Dean Delia, what are your recollections of the first Earth Day, and what was your role in organizing and participating in the first Earth Day event?
Well, my recollection of the first Earth Day was it was a very grassroots kind of event with participation with a lot of graduate students like us, and also some of the faculty members that we had. And we had some very prominent faculty members such as Eugene Odom, who wrote the first textbook on ecology, and who coined the term spaceship Earth, which is something that we all still use today. I think that it was nationally very prominent as well. We knew this was something more than just a local event in Athens, Georgia. We knew this was something that was being repeated at campuses all over the country. So it was a movement. It was something that we were really glad to participate in. My role in it was to be one of the people doing a teach-in. So I did a teach-in, and I talked about human population and my concerns about that. We were all very interested in that because of Paul Ehrlich's book, Population Bomb, which came out in 1968. And it was really a stunning book. And Paul was on the Johnny Carson show something like 20 times. That was the Tonight Show, the big late night TV show. So he was sort of a celebrity. And so that was my main role. But I also was somehow involved with the national organization. And I remember going to a meeting in New Orleans just after the UGA thing, as I recall, and reporting back the results of what we had accomplished. So it was, everyone played a small part. It was a lot of people, and as Gene will tell you, it was a little disorganized.
Thank you. Yes, it's especially important with our population continuously growing. Dr. Turner, what are your recollections and what role did you play?
As Chris was saying, it was grassroots in a sense, but there were elements coming in from all sides and all above, below, sideways. Some people were experienced at doing this. A lot of people, of course, weren't, and we didn't know who each other was. My role, in part, was there was a poetry contest. There was an interactive art contest that Hank here won or received.
Who won the poetry? Who won the poetry?
Some guy that didn't write poetry submitted something. Yours truly, and it was Coleman Barks was on the panel, and most people don't know him, but he is practically the U.S. authority, or I'm not sure if he's still alive, on the Book of Rumi, which he did all over the world. A wonderful, wonderful English teacher, and I never knew he was on campus. And things like that were happening that people had not known to come together. I invited Walter Cronkite, the most prominent journalist, TV news broadcaster in the U.S., and we had a correspondence, and then it just stopped. Things were just going unexpectedly in different directions, and it came together with forces of goodwill.
Thank you. Yeah. Dr. Shugart, what would you like to add about your recollections and role in this? I'm sorry, sir, you're muted at this moment.
I hope I didn't mess things up. Yeah, for me, basically, the experience was quite an experience participating in Earth Day. Of course, we're in a coronavirus shutdown, so I've spent most of my last month and a half cleaning out closets, and we found the old Christmas letter from about 1970 or 69, where my wife reported that I flew on an airplane for the first time, which I found thrilling, and went to a place called Arley House, which was a big kind of a convention of people interested in the environment and somewhat activist folks. And it says in the letter, Hank came back much more excited about how the environment and human role in it. So I had this exposure to that. On the day of Earth Day, which was a gorgeous day that only Georgia seems to be able to produce, beautiful day in spring, I gave a talk to a big mob of people out by the Union, which was probably about as big an audience as I've ever engaged. Came off the podium from the talk, found out my wife was in the hospital losing our baby. Or she didn't lose it, actually, it came out okay, because she got caught up in a kind of a racial incident in the high school she was teaching. And Athens, Georgia hung on to segregation like grim death. This was the last of it, thank God. And I basically got her out of the hospital. About 4 or 5 days later, took my comprehensive exam. So I was pretty much fried by the time Earth Day was over with. But I remember it as vividly as I remember any day of my life for multiple reasons, really. And it was a great and marvelous event at the time. I've never participated in anything quite like it at a personal level.
Thank you. And I'm so glad everyone turned out okay at that time. Congratulations, I guess. And I'm glad you all are safe. Dr. Shugart, if you don't mind, what motivated you to get involved and what were the big issues of concern at the time?
Sure. Well, when I was a sophomore in college, I shipped off to Patuxent Wildlife Refuge as a kind of a tech for a lab that worked on pesticides in birds, and dissected something on the order of about 700 or so bald eagles. Every eagle that Fish and Wildlife Service had found, basically. Removed organs and tried to see how much DDT was in the livers and different parts of the animals. I don't think I'll ever forget the way eagle flesh smells. It's very peppery, like Tabasco sauce, weird odor that I don't associate with anything really except eagles. So I was pretty aware of the notion that a pollutant could be spreading all over the world. Basically, weirdly enough, right before Earth Day, Sidney Gontry, who was doing a postdoc in zoology now, wrote an article for a bird magazine, Audubon Field Notes, that talked about the fact that the last stand of the brown pelican in North America was just right off the coast of Louisiana. They were gone from everywhere else because of pesticides. So it was shocking. I was very worried about it all. And as a bird watcher, I was pretty aware of the fact that human degradation of landscapes was absolutely wiping out all sorts of rare and endangered animals, particularly birds. So it was hard to be a zoologist at that point in life without realizing we were changing things a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like there was so much going on at that time. Dean Delia, what motivated you to be involved?
Well, that was a very interesting time in the history of the United States. As Gene and Hank have indicated, it was a time of real turmoil. The civil rights movement was very important at that time. Bobby Kennedy had just been assassinated. We had riots and burning of the city of Los Angeles. We had the Vietnam War and all the protests. We had people shot at Kent State. We had the convention in Chicago, Democratic Convention of '68, which was an awful event. And there was just a lot of political foment. And at the same time, there was this realization that the planet was in trouble, that we were doing things as humans that were having a large impact. And so I wanted to be a player in that. I wanted to be somebody that would help to turn things around. So that's what motivated me.
And thank you for being involved. This has had a lasting impact from all three of you. Dr. Turner, what was the biggest issues of concern to you at the time?
All the things that were mentioned. The University of Georgia had only in the last few years allowed blacks on campus. Charlene Hunter Galt had just gone through the campus as a graduate, the first black student, I think, or maybe close to, no, she wasn't. Yes, I think she was.
She was, I think, yeah.
And females no longer had to wear saddle shoes. We had tremendous strife because of the Vietnam War. And I had spent time on a ship reading Aldo Leopold, which was of course, he's a wildlife biologist from hunter turned conservationist with technical skills and very good narrative skills. So the writing was excellent, and he meant something because we all were living in a way, I mean, a lot of the students, that is, had grown up going out in the wild and seeing things and being by themselves. And so nature was natural to us. We liked it. Sometimes we liked it more than people. And we had an imbalance, which is why the book was called Towards Balance. And it wasn't a book, but maybe a written product that it was called Towards Balance, because things were imbalanced at the time.
Thank you. Yeah, during such a dynamic time, it was so important, and thank you all for being involved in the first Earth Day. Dr. Turner, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off on the next question, what was the impact that this first Earth Day had across the country, and what advice would you give to someone wanting to get involved in the environmental movement now?
Well, there's two different questions. The impact we're not totally sure of, but it seemed to spark a lot of rebalancing on the part of some people. For me, it gave people confidence that they should just don't try to be perfect, just do it. trust yourself, and be curious and have some joy in it, and go try things, because there wasn't a whole lot of fear to this. We just tried things. So I eventually, I mean, everybody did things that are peculiar to themselves, but I went to Washington and talked to the senator about the supersonic transport to get him to vote against it. We talked at City Hall, downtown. We gave little talks. We went to Rotary clubs. I started a network of ecology groups in Georgia. There are things that some things worked, some things didn't work, but we were trying things because we were asked, and often we were pointed toward because of the professors knew something, you know. So it was really, I would say it was fun.
Thank you.
We felt satisfied because we were meeting some inherent sense of need that both we felt society, as we're trying to figure out how things work, that society needed to work on themselves.
It sounds like part of the success was the closeness of all the groups trying to work for the environment. Dr. Shugart, what would you add to this?
You're mute. You're mute again, Hank.
Rampaging. It seems to me that the things that have changed are pretty complicated. I think at the time of Earth Day, I was amazed that people were actually interested in hearing a boy birdwatcher talk about global political issues and take them seriously. I mean, it seemed bizarre to me. In part, that was because at the time of Earth Day, we were on the tail end of physicists saving the U.S. from World War II with nuclear weapons. The Salk vaccine had gotten rid of polio. There was a general belief that scientists were sort of nerdy but useful people working in a positive way towards society. And I think in some ways, a lot of the outcomes from Earth Day had to do with recycling and energy conservation, a keen awareness of pollution, environmental cleanup became very important. So I think that was good. I think in the current situation, the willingness to trust science just is seriously eroded since Earth Day. And right now, it seems more logical to shoot the messenger rather than listen to the message. So that's an issue that people working in this area today have to face. Science has been politicized. I mean, there was a day when conservation as an issue had no politics whatsoever. Republicans embraced it every bit as warmly as Democrats. It's much more complicated now. And, you know, there's this sort of, for every expert, there's an anti-expert politicization of science. It's also clear that it's not just a matter of teaching people about the environment. There are all sorts of social, human complexities that need to be engaged in a way that we probably didn't engage them all that well at the time, although we certainly were trying to.
Thank you. Given the complexity of trying to get the movement going and the varying messages that are currently going on, Delia, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to be involved in this right now?
Let me just, I just want to amplify a little bit on the first. There were a lot of very palpable results that came out of this in terms of legislation. There was a whole suite of national bills that went through the Congress and were signed by President Nixon, oddly enough, who really became a real adherent to the environment when he saw that it was a popular thing. So we had NEPA, which established the National Environmental Policy Act, established EPA. NOAA was established by executive order, not by legislation. We had the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, TSCA, RCRA, and just a whole series of things. This was very important because up till then, the environment was considered a state's obligation and to take care of. And this was a very clear statement that this was a national obligation. So what else was accomplished? Well, we all got in this because of a couple of books. Gene mentioned Aldo Leopold. Hank mentioned Rachel Carson, her two books, See Around Us and Silent Spring, were very critical. And then probably the granddaddy of them all was Paul Ehrlich's book, Population. And back then, the population of the planet was exactly 1/2 of what it is now. So despite that clarion call that something had to be done about overpopulation, it's the biggest failure I see in the last 50 years. We've never really made much progress with that. And the projections say we are headed to perhaps 12 billion people on the planet. And that is a real big change. So with regard to your other question about what would you advise somebody wanting to get into this, I think the best thing you can do is know the science. If you know the science, then you'll be better prepared to deal with issues such as policy and the outcomes that we need to have. I find that a lot of people have very good intentions, but they're technically not sufficient in their training. So I think know the science and get involved. And you know, Gene and I have been fighting for issues of clean water related things, nutrient pollution, throughout our entire careers. And I think that we were inspired by Earth Day to take that kind of, I don't want to say activist, because we had to have a certain amount of disinterest in terms of looking at the science. You can't, if you know what outcome you're trying to achieve, you're not an unbiased observer. But we were certainly serious about understanding the problem and then trying to find what the solutions would be there.
Do you see the issues in the next 50 years being similar to what we're going through now in the last 50 years?
Well, the population problem is very much with us. And when you consider that everybody wants to live at the Western style of living, which is a high energy use, really wasteful kind of style of living, it means that the human impact factor on a per capita basis is much higher than it was back even in the days of Earth Day, when there were half the number of people on Earth. So it even amplifies the number, the impact of the people that are on the planet. And we've got to somehow reconcile that.
Thank you. Dr. Shugart, what do you see the major issues being in the next 50 years?
Well, you know, over time, I've become much more interested in global scale issues. And that's where a lot of my research is these days. If you look at the planet in the simplest imaginable way, from an environmental point of view, you have population change, mostly population growth, pushing changes in physical systems and chemical systems. You know, you change the emissions to the atmosphere and you change the way the atmosphere's heat balance works. You change the physics of the surface and you affect the way it absorbs heat. So there's this sort of chemical and physical and some degree biological interactions going on that are driven by population increase. You can work pretty hard and pretty effectively at trying to solve any part of that sort of three-legged stool between population, chemistry, and physics. The thing I worry about the most in the future, I guess you always worry about the things you know the least about. Right now, there's some evidence that the oceans are taking on a fair amount of heat from various changes in the atmosphere. And I really worry that if we ever manage to heat the ocean enough that we cut off the deep water circulation, which could happen, we're going to, in changing ocean current, we are going to be in absolute deep trouble. And that's one of my big concerns.
It's a huge concern, and I know that's something that we've talked about in my own studies. Dr. Turner, what would you add to this?
The role of people in making this work, so to speak. As we've mentioned, at the end of this century, people will have about 1.25 acres per person to get everything, jackets, glasses, computers, house, food, minerals, just per person. And at the same time, we know that the desirable future we want is probably the one we don't see very often, but unfortunately, but in order to have this kind of addressing of things in a satisfactory way, we have to have fair, equitable social systems that are transcending things like misleading indicators like gross national product and things that basically go in the other direction. So, and competition and materialism. And so it's going to come to people as a group that this coronavirus basically shows that we can act on behalf of groups, because that is our natural heritage, to want to work together as communities, although it's covered over with other things. That is there, and we can overcome to make this not a recovery, but a transformation in the next 50 years to be headed somewhere other than where we are now. And it's going to take individuals to be thinking of and doing and being that alternative. And those steps are going to take a while, of course, to happen, but it has to be done.
Can I make a comment on that? I think that the coronavirus really illustrates how a crisis is something that really brings people together, and we're good at responding to something that has an immediate threat to it. The more insidious problem is the slow degradation of systems with time and the impacts of growing population. And it's more difficult for us to address a problem like that. And I think that's a big challenge for us.
Thank you all for your thoughts. Unfortunately, this is all the time we really have to discuss. I want to thank you all, Dean Delia, Dr. Turner, and Dr. Shugart, for an engaging discussion. I think we've all learned a lot. We appreciate your time and your reflection on the past and where we're headed in the future. I think hearing your personal account of the impacts, such as the rapid growth of the population and how we need to be close-knit and working in a dynamic way, is really helpful. I know that we're having a hard time now that we're on lockdown to be a part of this coming Earth Day. And Louisiana State University's College of the Coast and Environment always encourages everyone to participate in Earth Day. While this year we may not be allowed to gather to promote safety for the environment, you can still do your part by incorporating more plant-based meals, turning off your lights and electronics, just making a choice to further educate yourself on the issues that the natural world faces. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.